You nestle deeper into your snow bed, the curved wall behind you now more familiar than foreign. Its gentle chill is no longer biting, it's part of the atmosphere, like the soft rustle of fur, the flicker of a lamp, or the muffled wind outside. But now you begin to wonder, could it get warmer in here? Because here's something surprising, some igloos did get warmer, much warmer. So warm, in fact, they could dry clothes, warm soup, and yes, even feel a bit like a sauna. Welcome to the igloo as a heat trap, a snow shelter so finely tuned that with the right number of bodies, a burning lamp, and maybe a sealed tunnel, the temperature could climb just above freezing. It doesn't sound like much. But in a landscape that regularly dips below -40 degrees Celsius, a room at +5 degrees Celsius feels like spring break in Cancun. Imagine a group of hunters returning from a long trek. Their clothes are damp, their gear covered in frost, their boots stiff with cold. They huddle inside a freshly built igloo, light the kulak, pull off their outer layers, and hang them from carved snow pegs or racks made from driftwood. The lamp burns low and steady, its heat beginning to permeate the air. Within an hour, the walls begin to sweat slightly. That thin inner glaze softens, then refreezes. The dome becomes smoother, denser, shinier. You press your palm to it and feel, not melting, but resilience. The kind of warmth that doesn't collapse a wall but comforts a tired body. Historians still argue whether certain igloos were deliberately designed to maximize heat for specific purposes, like drying sealskins or warming infants. Some evidence suggests that double lamp setups were used, particularly in larger communal spaces. Others believe it was simply a natural consequence of proximity: more people, more breath, more body heat. A feedback loop of warmth. In any case, warmth was always managed, never taken for granted. Overheat the dome and you risk drip. Let it cool too far, and breath freezes to your sleeping robe. So families adapted. They trimmed the lamp wick carefully. They adjusted vent holes. They even kept an eye on the color of the walls. A subtle shift in brightness or sheen could signal rising humidity. Now, here's a quirky, and slightly adorable, fact. In especially cold snaps, some Inuit families would bring puppies or small dogs into the igloo, not just for companionship, but for extra warmth. A handful of small, furry heaters curled up at your feet could make the difference between a restful night and frozen toes. You look down at your imaginary boots now, drying neatly by the tunnel opening. No longer crusted with frost. They'll be warm in the morning, thanks to the slow and steady heat cycling through this snowsphere. And speaking of heat, what happens when the lamp burns low? That's when the sleeping platform earns its name. Snow retains warmth longer than you'd think, especially when protected from wind. Once the igloo reaches thermal balance, that raised platform becomes a cozy pod, elevated from cold air, ringed by compact snow, and softened with fur or hide. You won't sweat, but you'll feel a level of comfort that defies the raw elements outside. Some families even layered the snow platform with heather, moss, or woven grass mats, gathered during warmer months and stored for winter. Not everywhere, of course, but in regions where such plants could be harvested. Another layer of thoughtful insulation. Another reason the igloo was never just a snow hut, it was a curated microclimate. Now imagine this, in the middle of winter, with the wind rattling the plains and visibility near zero, you sit inside a snow dome warm enough to sip broth and hang socks to dry. Outside, the world is glass. Inside, the walls shimmer faintly with ice. Not melting. Not sweating. Just holding. And perhaps the most poetic image? Some elders remembered the sound of drying clothes in the lamplight. Not the hiss of water boiling, but a soft crinkle. The crinkle of frozen fabric slowly becoming supple again. The silent, soothing soundtrack of Arctic domestic life. Of course, if things got too warm, and sometimes they did, the Inuit didn't panic. They simply opened the tunnel flap, widened the vent, or stepped outside to cool the structure. Heat was a gift, but like everything else in this environment, it came with responsibility. You stretch out on the sleeping bench, one arm behind your head, and take a long, slow breath. The air doesn't sting. Your clothes are dry. Your boots are drying. The walls hold steady. And in that moment, you understand something deep and quiet. This structure is not just shelter, it's strategy. It's a memory of every family who came before. Of hunters who learned how to balance fire and frost. Of mothers who read lamp flames like books. Of children who knew when the wall needed a patch, or the vent needed a poke. This wasn't guesswork. This was craft, perfected in silence. The woman who understands this doesn't manipulate the dynamic, she orients it. She becomes the gravitational force around which the masculine learns to orbit, not in submission, but in sacred recognition. Because a man who feels truly drawn to protect and admire does so not out of fear of losing you, but out of reverence for your essence, an essence that cannot be replicated, only remembered. She does not weaponize her softness. She inhabits it. And that softness, when it is born from strength, from having chosen healing over bitterness, is the most disarming force in the world. It calls forth the protector, not the predator. It calls forth the man's inner king, not his hunter. In Jungian terms, she is no longer the anima projection he casts upon the unformed women of his youth. She is not the one he fantasizes about rescuing. She is the initiator, the mirror of his soul, the one who calls him to face his own archetypes. The mother, the lover, the priestess, the wise one. She is not just one thing. She is a circle of selves, a living symbol of wholeness. But only a woman who has met herself deeply can embody this. She must have witnessed her own shadow, not banished it. She must have made peace with her loneliness, her need, her rage, and her longing. She must have stopped blaming the world, or men, or her past. Not because they didn't hurt her, but because she chose to become something more than the sum of her wounds. A man senses this in her not by what she says, but by what she doesn't need to say. There's a stillness to her, a quiet clarity. She doesn't try to impress, to seduce, to win. She allows. She lets things unfold. She listens to him, yes, but more importantly, to herself. And in that act of radical inner listening, she cultivates the sacred soil of her feminine power. Men are not inspired by control. They are inspired by mystery. But mystery is not about secrets, it's about depth. A depth that reveals itself slowly, over time, like a forest path growing darker and more beautiful the further one walks. And when a man feels that there is more to discover, when he senses that you are not a surface to skim but an ocean to descend into, the instinct to guard that depth awakens. It is not about being elusive. It is about being endlessly real. And real women are rare. Not women who pretend they don't care. Not women who play games. But women who have nothing to prove. Because they have already chosen themselves. Again and again. In rooms with closed doors. In nights of aching silence. In moments when no one clapped for their growth, and they bloomed anyway. She knows that admiration without awareness is infatuation. She is not interested in being adored blindly. She wants to be seen. Not just for her smile or her skin, but for the lifetimes her soul has endured and survived. She wants a man who protects not her fragility, but her becoming. Who holds space for her changes without fear. And here is the paradox: when she no longer needs his admiration, it flows to her effortlessly. When she no longer seeks his arms for safety, he longs to offer them. When she stops asking to be chosen, he begins to wonder how he could ever forget her. This is the woman who carries the sacred fire. the inner flame that doesn't burn others, but illuminates herself. And by doing so, she awakens something holy in those who cross her path. Not every man will rise to meet it, but the ones who do will never again settle for smoke when they've once tasted flame. Because the feminine energy that evokes admiration is not the performance of confidence. It is the unapologetic embodiment of wholeness. So if you are waiting to be admired, to be protected, to be held in awe, ask first, have I become the kind of woman who no longer waits, but simply is? The answer is not in becoming more, but in removing all that is not you. The false masks, the performative smiles, the endless people-pleasing. And beneath it all, the woman who once whispered, "Am I enough?" will rise and proclaim, "I always was." And that voice, steady, sacred, and sure, will echo in the heart of the man destined to meet her not with desire alone, but with devotion. The man who devotes himself does not do so because he has been seduced. He does so because something within him has been remembered. He is not conquered. He is called. And the call did not come from her lips, it came from her essence. From the ache of her stillness, from the gravity of her gaze, from the silence she carried without apology. Because there is a specific kind of woman who awakens a man's archetypal longing, the longing not just to touch, but to tend. Not just to possess, but to protect. She is the living embodiment of the anima he has searched for in dreams and distorted through projection. And when he meets her in the flesh, it shatters something in him. His games, his bravado, his need for control, all begin to fall like ash in the presence of her unwavering truth. This is why the woman who is rooted in her self-worth must be prepared. Not every man is ready to protect what reveals his own unworthiness. Some will try to silence her. Others will attempt to own her. Many will love her shadow more than her soul, because the soul requires accountability. The shadow only demands obsession. But the man whose soul is ready to rise, he will recognize her. Not through words, but through sensation. His body will tighten, his heart will tremble, and his old patterns will begin to feel small. Because in her presence, he will be asked, without a word, to expand. You do not expand a man by instructing him. You expand him by being expansive. In how you speak, in how you sit, in how you breathe through pain instead of blaming it, in how you walk away from what dishonors you, not in anger, but in reclamation. This is the energetic shift. Not to dominate the man, but to stand so fully in your feminine presence that only the king in him can step forward. And if he is not a king, he will flee. Not because you were too much, but because you refused to make yourself less. And yet, this is not about superiority. The feminine does not need to rise above the masculine. She needs to return to herself. And in doing so, she evokes a return in him. To the place where stillness meets strength. Where action is no longer aggression, but service. Men long to serve what they revere. But reverence requires one thing above all, mystery. Not confusion. Not manipulation. But the mystery of wholeness. A woman who holds all her parts, the soft and the sharp, the broken and the blooming, and does not explain them away. Carl Jung taught that the process of individuation, of becoming a fully formed self, requires that we face the unconscious, confront our projections, and integrate our shadow. For the woman, this often means descending into her emotional body, witnessing the places where she begged for love instead of embodying it. The places where she tried to earn safety instead of becoming it. And when she has walked that valley, when she has felt the pain of unreciprocated love, of being too much, of being not enough, and chosen not bitterness, but beauty, she becomes a magnetic force. Not because she needs a man to admire her, but because her very being commands it. Admiration is not about flattery. It is about recognition. The man who truly admires you does not only see your light, he sees your fire. He sees the work you've done, whether he can name it or not. He feels the depth in your laughter, the clarity in your boundaries, the sacredness in your solitude. And it humbles him. This humility is not weakness. It is strength turned inward. It is the moment he realizes that the woman before him is not something to be acquired, she is someone to honor. Someone whose presence demands intention, not impulse. Presence, not performance. Vulnerability, not conquest. He may resist at first, because a man who has been conditioned to dominate will not know what to do with a woman he cannot own. He may try to provoke you, test you, pull you down to a place where he feels more in control. And that is where your discernment becomes your crown. You do not need to correct him. You need only remain in your power. Unshaken. Not cold. Not cruel. But clear. And in that clarity, you become the mirror he did not know he needed. The one that doesn't distort, but reveals. When a woman becomes a mirror of truth, she doesn't reflect what the man wants to see, she reflects what he needs to confront. And that, more than anything, awakens the true masculine. The part of him buried beneath distraction and bravado. The silent warrior. The devoted protector. The man who doesn't run from fire, but learns to stand inside it. You see, a man's desire to protect is not simply a reaction to vulnerability, it is a response to sacredness. It is not weakness that stirs his shield, it is worth. A woman in her fullness doesn't awaken pity. She awakens presence. She calls the man into remembrance, not just of her, but of himself. Of who he was before the masks. Before the armor. Before the world taught him that love must be earned with performance instead of presence. She reminds him that he, too, is sacred. But only if she has claimed that sacredness within herself first. This is where so many women get lost, in the doing. In trying to earn love by being more desirable, more available, more accommodating. But the woman who is admired, deeply, madly, reverently admired, is not admired because of what she gives. She is admired because of what she withholds. She withholds the temptation to over-explain, to justify, to overextend. She resists the urge to prove her value, because she knows her value. And that knowing reshapes every interaction. She no longer performs in hopes of receiving love. She embodies it. And in doing so, she becomes unforgettable. This does not mean she is emotionless. On the contrary, she feels everything. But she channels her emotion into clarity, not chaos. She doesn't leak her wounds. She wields them. Like a woman who has walked the underworld and returned not with scars, but with language for her soul. When she speaks, she doesn't dramatize. She doesn't chase. She simply says, "Here I am. This is what I carry. Can you hold it, not for me, but with me?" And it is in that invitation, not demand, that a man's heart begins to shift. Because men are not drawn to chaos. They are drawn to challenge, not the kind that tears them down, but the kind that calls them up. The feminine challenge is not a test of worth. It is a mirror of alignment. She does not ask the man to become someone else. She asks, "Can you meet me where I already am?" This meeting point, this energetic frequency, is where admiration and protection bloom naturally. Not because she manipulates him into it, but because her presence leaves no other option. To be near her is to rise, or to walk away. And many will walk away. Because the woman who no longer abandons herself is dangerous to the man who still abandons himself. She is a threat to his illusions, a disruption to his ego, a living contradiction to the stories he tells himself about love and power. But to the man who is ready, she is home. This man does not protect her out of guilt or fear. He protects her because she represents something he refuses to lose. She is not a possession. She is a pathway to his own awakening, to his purpose, to his sacred masculine. And in her presence, he learns that strength is not about control. It's about devotion. Devotion is not servitude. It is choice. A daily, embodied choice to stand for what is holy. And the truly feminine woman is holy, not because she is pure, but because she is whole. She does not reject her sensuality. She does not shame her desire. She lets her wildness breathe beside her stillness. She wears her darkness beside her light. And she makes no apologies for any of it. She knows that true femininity is not meek, it is magnetic. It does not beg. It beckons. And only those who are unafraid of their own depth will answer. The man who answers is not perfect. He is not without wounds. But he is willing. Willing to be changed. Willing to stand still and feel. Willing to lose his ego if it means finding his soul. And the woman who meets him there, not beneath him, not behind him, but beside him, becomes more than admired. She becomes essential. A woman becomes essential not when she fills a void, but when she embodies a presence so whole, it commands remembrance. She does not beg to be needed. Her very being becomes a compass, pointing a man back to the parts of himself he forgot how to trust. This kind of woman does not awaken temporary desire. She awakens devotion that disturbs. Because it makes a man question everything he thought he knew about connection. About power. About love. The world is full of mirrors that flatter the ego. But rarely does a man meet a mirror that pierces it. She does not stroke his pride, she honors his potential. And that difference is everything. Because when a woman sees a man not as he is, but as he could become, it stirs in him both fear and fire. It is terrifying to be seen at that level. To feel the weight of being loved not for his facade, but for the truth beneath it. But it is also liberating. Because he realizes, for the first time, that he no longer has to perform to be valued. He has only to arrive. And yet, she will not wait for him. This is the paradox. The feminine energy that awakens admiration and the desire to protect never waits. It remains. It resides. It lives fully in her own becoming, her own healing, her own radiant stillness. The man who joins her on that path does so by choice, not by persuasion. And in that choice, he becomes more than a lover. He becomes a witness. To witness her, truly witness her, is to be changed. Because she does not offer a story. She offers an invitation. Into depth. Into discomfort. Into the unraveling of illusion and the rebuilding of something raw, sacred, and wild. She does not make herself easy to hold, not because she is complicated, but because she is vast. Her emotional intelligence cuts through pretense. Her intuition reads below the surface. Her softness is not submission, it is dangerous openness. And only the man who has done his own excavation, who has sat in the dark and listened to his shame without running, can hold her without fear. Carl Jung understood that the meeting of two souls is not just romance, it is collision. A confrontation with the unconscious. A drawing out of the buried and the broken. And when the feminine has walked through her own labyrinth of abandonment, betrayal, and silence, and emerged not with armor, but with honor, she becomes a chalice of transformation. She no longer needs to scream to be heard. Her silence carries the weight of centuries. Her gaze undresses projections. Her body becomes less a temple to be entered and more an altar to be revered. She knows the difference between being desired and being held in awe. And she no longer settles for the former. Admiration is no longer enough. Protection is no longer transactional. She requires presence. Depth. A man whose soul does not flee at the sight of her shadow, but leans in, because he recognizes his own. The feminine does not want to be worshipped. She wants to be understood. Not with logic, but with soul. She wants the man who can sit with her grief without fixing it. Who can watch her rage and not flinch. Who can hear her truth and not retreat? And who, in the face of all this, chooses to stay, not because he has to, but because something sacred has called him to remain. This man will not always know what to do. He will stumble. He will falter. But he will keep choosing her. Not because she completes him, but because she reminds him of who he truly is. And in that remembrance, he becomes the man she no longer hoped for, but expected. Not a savior. Not a fixer. Not a provider. But a witness. A protector of her process. A guardian of her becoming. A man who does not compete with her light but learns to dance in its warmth. She does not awaken this by force. She awakens it by being the flame that does not flicker in the presence of fear. There is a moment in every sacred connection where words become too small to hold the weight of what is being exchanged. A glance becomes a vow. A silence becomes a reckoning. And in this moment, when the woman no longer seeks to be chosen but stands firmly in her own light, the man sees her, not as a possession, not as a conquest, but as a living threshold. A threshold into everything he has not yet dared to feel. This is why the desire to protect is not just a behavioral reflex. It is a soul impulse. It rises from the deep waters of the masculine psyche, where instinct meets initiation. Where the need to dominate is eclipsed by the call to devote. It is not awakened by weakness. It is summoned by depth. By that mysterious, ancient language spoken not by the lips, but by the womb of the woman who knows who she is. She is not seductive, she is sovereign. She does not need to say, "I am worthy." Her body says it for her. Her boundaries speak it. Her refusal to betray herself echoes it in every room she enters. She radiates the rarest kind of beauty, the kind that cannot be extracted or replicated, the kind that remembers herself even in longing. And when a man feels this, truly feels this, he cannot unsee her. He cannot forget the sensation of standing in the presence of someone who requires nothing, but invites everything. She is the one who no longer makes herself smaller to be held. Who no longer shapeshifts to be accepted. Who no longer sacrifices her mystery on the altar of validation. She is not hard to love. She is hard to reach, and that is entirely different. Because she has peeled herself out of her wounds. She has cried enough for 2 lifetimes. She has begged. She has broken. She has whispered, "Why not me?" into the darkness of her own becoming. And now she does not chase. She chooses. She does not yearn to be understood by those who cannot see. She simply waits, not for a man to arrive, but for the moment she recognizes his eyes as reflections of her own journey. And he, this man who has walked his own dark nights, who has held his own shame, who has dared to love without the illusion of control, he will not just see her. He will recognize her. He will feel it in the ancient drumbeat of his chest. In the way time slows when she speaks. In the way his anger dissolves not because she fears it, but because she meets it with grounded stillness. He will want to protect her, not because she is fragile, but because she is sacred. To protect her is to protect his own awakening. To embrace her is to return to himself. To admire her is to admit that the divine feminine does not exist above him, but within him. And her presence calls it forth. This is how the dance begins. Not with a chase, but with a recognition. Not with a promise, but with a presence. Not with performance, but with truth. And in that sacred unfolding, the woman who has stopped searching for love begins to receive it. Not as a rescue, not as validation, but as witnessing. As devotion without dependence. As protection that doesn't cage, but sets her freer than she's ever dared to be. Because the man who loves her truly does not try to tame her fire. He simply says, "I will stand beside it." He offers his hands not to mold her, but to hold space for her expansion. He offers his chest not as a shield from the world, but as a place where she can rest without shrinking. And he offers his eyes, clear, steady, unafraid, to remind her. You are seen. You are safe. You are sovereign. This is not a fantasy. This is what happens when a woman rises into her whole self and no longer accepts fragments in return. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.